Rabbi Ilana Schwartzman. I'm the rabbi at Congregation Kol Ami in Salt Lake City, Utah. I am a third-generation rabbi, Reform rabbi. I was born in Biloxi, Mississippi. My father was a chaplain in the Air Force. When I was ordained in Cincinnati from Hebrew Union College Institute of Jewish Religion, I moved to Buffalo, New York to serve as an assistant rabbi. I met my wonderful husband, Art Karras, there. We were married 2 summers ago, and we moved to Salt Lake City together for this wonderful congregation, and we will be here 3 years in July.
והובא אל אחרון הכהן או אל אחת מבניו הכהנים וראה הכהן את הנגע באור הבשר.
Rabbis in particular don't receive appointments. We interview for positions. And so when I had finished my 3-year contract in Buffalo, I interviewed with a large number of congregations. I thought I was looking for an assistantship, and it turns out that this was the only solo position that I looked at. It's a 350 family congregation, and so they need 1 full-time rabbi. They could probably use another half, but that's okay. And there were about 30 people who applied for this position, and so you go through an entire interview process of Skyping and phones, and then they brought me out to Utah twice to meet the congregation, and it turned out that we were a very good fit. And so I have just, this summer I will be finishing my first 3-year contract here, and then I'm signing on for another 5 at least. In Utah, it makes it very significant also to my congregation and to Jews in Utah to be very involved, and it's a wonderful and passionate community. So my congregation is 350 families, which is about 1,000 people. So in Utah terms, we're about the size of a ward. The Jewish community in Utah is bigger than that, in that so for example, for a lot of LDS people, they keep roll when they go to church, and we don't do that. People will come and they will not come, and they will join and they will not join, and we'd love to see everybody, absolutely. The estimation is that there are 5,000 Jews in Utah. I think that's low. I think that there are more than that. We've been saying that for a few decades now. This is not the only synagogue in Utah. There is a more Orthodox group in Salt Lake. There is a more Reform group in Park City, as well as a small group in Ogden. There is a Reconstructionist Chavurah, which is a small group of people that meet in our building once a month at least. And so our community is very diverse in beliefs and in practices and in affiliation and how people relate. So that synagogues work a little bit different than churches. We have membership, and so we ask people, if you want these services, if you want these roles and these opportunities to be able to be provided, then we ask people to become members, and that costs money. We never turn people away because of money. But so for example, at a church where someone may tithe, we don't obligate tithing, or at another sort of a religious institution where they may pass a plate during services, we as Jews don't touch money on our Sabbath, so we can't do that. So we really ask people to become members and to support us financially as well as spiritually and communally. People in Utah are most definitely aware of the Jewish presence. It's funny, when I started telling family members and friends that I was moving to Utah, outside of Utah, they're like, there are Jews in Utah? Like, they don't, like, okay. But within Utah, people are very aware. We've had a Jewish governor, actually before I think before New York even had a Jewish governor. We had Governor Bamberger. We have Jewish legislators. We have Patrice Arendt now. We have had David Litvak in the past, who were both members of the congregation. Certainly the LDS population and most of Utah knows that there are Jews here. The question is, what do they know about Jews and what do they know that Jews are? So that I go to a number of classes and I talk to people, and I will say, what do you know about Judaism? What do Jews believe? Before I was even here, Brigham Young gave the Jewish community the land for our cemeteries. We were always welcomed in Salt Lake City, and that's not true of every place in the world, and certainly not true of every place in the United States. It's a really amazing thing. Certainly the LDS population, and most of Utah knows that there are Jews here. The question is, what do they know about Jews, and what do they know that Jews are? So that I go to a number of classes and I talk to people, and I will say, what do you know about Judaism? What do Jews believe? And then they say things like, well, Jews did sacrifices in biblical times and Jesus was Jewish. Yes, okay. So they know about biblical Judaism, they know about patriarchs and matriarchs and the Exodus from Egypt and all of that stuff. And then if I push a little deeper, maybe they know about the Holocaust, but there's a real dearth of information about what happened between the Bible and the Holocaust and what's happened since the Holocaust. So they don't know how Jews practice or what Jews believe or even that it's a synagogue. The LDS community finds and relates to Judaism in a very strong way. And when we introduce ourselves as Jews in the LDS community, inevitably someone will say, we have so much in common. And to a certain degree, it's true. And to a certain degree, there's some pretty significant differences in terms of hierarchy, in terms of beliefs, in terms of some of our history overlaps in really interesting ways in terms of wandering and finding the right place for us. But some of the beliefs are really significantly different. And I think that people are very interested, they're very welcoming, but it's really hard to relate to Judaism as members of another religion. So one example, Judaism as a religion doesn't say that there is one thing that happens to you after you pass away, right? Different Jews have different beliefs of what happens, but Judaism says, focus on this life, make it the best world that we can live in, and we'll worry about what happens later when it happens later, because this is all that we know and all that we have control of now. For the LDS population, that's a very foreign concept. For most Christian populations, that's a very foreign concept. In fact, in Islam, it's a very foreign concept as well. And so I will often have people say to me, then why do you do good things if you're not worried about heaven and hell? And for me, that's a very striking question, that somehow people don't think that the world that we live in is worth building towards the best world that we can live in, that this life isn't absolutely significant, because Jewishly it is. It's a huge difference between Judaism and some other religions, and people don't know that necessarily. Now, there are people who will tell you that if you want to learn about Judaism, there are three aspects that are really important. There's God, there's Torah, and there's Israel. And I would tell you that God is very personal to people. That Judaism doesn't say, this is what God is. Some Jews may, but Judaism doesn't, except to say that God is non-corporeal, without a body, and eternal, and there are some other aspects. But there are Jews who don't believe in God. There are many, many Jews who do. And then we move to Torah. Torah is the basic text. It's the 5 books of Moses: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Although Torah means teaching, and so it's not just that scroll. It's the entirety of the Tanakh, which is the Hebrew Bible, what some Christians may know as the Old Testament, although there are some differences between Tanakh and Old Testament. We as Jews don't call it Old Testament because that implies that there's a New Testament, and for us, there isn't. So we have Jewish scriptures and Hebrew scriptures. But that teaching, that idea of Torah, encompasses the book of the Torah, the commentary on it, so Mishnah and Midrash, and also Talmud, which are written commentaries, as well as what we consider to be oral Torah. And so anytime that I teach or comment or study Torah, anytime that you teach or study or comment on Torah, all of those are considered learning and are considered Torah. And so it's a very big part of Judaism. Education, being informed, knowing why we do what we do, is a very big part of Judaism. And then there's the piece called Israel. And some people may think that I'm talking about the country or the state of Israel, but when I say Israel Jewishly, there are a lot of different components, right? So the first one is that the patriarch, Jacob, has his name changed to Israel, which means literally to wrestle with God. and we move from the people to the person, Jacob or Israel, to the descendants of Jacob, who are the Israelites and the people Israel, to all Judaism. All Jews are considered the people Israel. And then there's also the land of Israel, which is the place that gets described in the Torah. So when I talk about God, Torah, and Israel, though, I'm talking about people and community. The question of how you relate to Jewish law is going to change how you relate to dietary requirements. But starting in the Torah, there are discussions of not boiling a kid in its mother's milk, of only eating things in the sea that have fins and scales, of very specific animals that you can eat that fly, and of only being able to eat land animals that have cloven hooves and chew their cud. So there are Jews that keep kosher, there are Jews that don't keep kosher, and there are Jews on a full spectrum in between. So for example, if I ask someone, do you keep kosher, and they say yes, I can ask them, do you have a separate set of plates for milk and meat? Well, maybe. And do you keep kosher for Passover, which has to do with leavened bread and which foods you eat for Passover and which you don't? Some say yes, some say no. Do you keep kosher outside the house? And many people will say, I keep vegetarian outside of the house. Do you buy kosher meat, which means was the meat slaughtered in a very specific way? Do you look for a hechsher on your food items? So that means that there are little symbols that tell you that a rabbi has overseen the processing of this food in the places where they were made to make sure that there are no unkosher foods in that place. There's a huge, huge spectrum. Here in our synagogue, we have a meat kitchen and a milk kitchen to make sure that those things are always separate. We also have a kosher-style vegetarian dairy kitchen, which means that everything that goes into that kitchen has to be vegetarian, but not that it necessarily needs a hechsher on it. So to different Jews, there are differing levels and ways of keeping kosher. So behind me, there's the prayer shawl. Traditionally, they are for men, and it's not the shawl that's the important part, it's the fringes and the knots at the end that are the significant piece. There's a prayer that says that you should wear fringes on the corners of your garments, and so that's where the prayer shawl comes from. So you wear phylacteries on your arm and on your head. Again, that same prayer that talked about the fringes of the garments talks about binding them as a sign upon your hand and between your eyes. And so there's a prayer in those phylacteries, the Shema and the V'ahavta, that again binds you to a certain degree to the commandedness. I don't wear phylacteries. Some women do. There is a commandment in the Torah that says that men should not dress in women's clothes and women should not dress in men's clothes. And there are those who believe that that applies specifically to phylacteries. There's a lot of discussion as what will religion, period, mean in the future to our children as we become less compartmentalized as society, as we become less afraid of other religions and other races and other ethnicities and other ways of doing things. As we become more accepting, is it important for us to have isolated communities that have similar views and values? And I do believe that it is. I think it reminds us who we are and how we relate to the world in a way that if we are one person in a sea of people, that we sometimes lose our way. And to have a community that is not online, that cares about what happens to you and where you are and what your beliefs are, and that takes care of you in tragedy and celebrates with you in happiness, and that maintains ritual. I think that we are a society right now that thinks that ritual is not important. And I think that the reform movement in particular tried that. And what we recognized was that ritual is important, that the way that we do things and the trappings of things are as important as the ethics and as important as the ideas. And we don't give up one for the other. And so I think if we instill in our community members this idea that yes, be accepting of everyone, love people, and at the same time remember who you are, where you come from, and why that's valuable, that we move forward in a very strong way.